Hello, and welcome to another vlog. This week's theme is the Paralympic Games. The opening ceremony for the Pyeongchang 2018 Paralympic Games will be held this Thursday, which is the same day that I will be releasing my educational video about the Paralympic Games, so be sure to subscribe if you want to see that video. Today there's a number of things that I'd like to talk about. First, I'd like to talk about the importance of the Paralympic movement, specifically why I think the Paralympics deserves more attention. I also want to talk briefly about the history of the Paralympic Games. And finally, I'd like to talk about some of the different sports in the Paralympics, particularly the 6 sports that will be part of the Pyeongchang 2018 Paralympic Games. So without further ado, let's get started. So I personally have 3 main reasons why I think that the Paralympics should be mainstream. The first reason is that Paralympic athletes work just as hard as their Olympic counterparts, and therefore I believe that they should have equal representation. This reason is quite self-explanatory, but I think it's only fair that our Paralympic athletes are given credit where credit is due. The second reason I think the Paralympics deserves more attention is because the Paralympics helps to eliminate harmful stereotypes about disabilities. Many people think that people with disabilities are incapable, which just isn't true. But the Paralympics proves that athletes with disabilities are just as capable as able-bodied athletes, which shows that people with disabilities are just as capable as able-bodied individuals. And that's a message that I like to drive home a lot on this series, but it's a message that I think is just important for us to remember on a day-to-day basis. The last reason why I think the Paralympics should be mainstream is because, like the Olympics, the Paralympics helps to usher in international cooperation. During the Paralympics, you have thousands of people from all these different countries coming together to fulfill a common goal. And I think that's really important today because now more than ever, it's important for us to get along. After all, we are the same species. So those are the 3 main reasons why I think that the Paralympic Games should be mainstream. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree. So that brings me to the second thing that I want to talk about, which is the history of the Paralympic movement. So adaptive sports have been around for over 100 years, but the Paralympic movement itself didn't start until the year 1944, when a man named Dr. Ludwig Guttmann opened a spinal injury center at the Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Great Britain. In 1948, Dr. Guttmann hosted the first Stoke Mandeville Games for athletes in wheelchairs, and then in 1952, he founded the International Stoke Mandeville Games when some Dutch ex-servicemen joined the Paralympic movement. However, it wasn't until 1960 that the very first Paralympic Games took place in Rome, Italy. There were 400 athletes present from 23 different countries. Now, Canada's Paralympic team didn't actually attend their first Paralympics until 1968, and that was held in Tel Aviv, Israel. However, in 1976, Canada had the opportunity to host their first ever Paralympic Games, which took place in Toronto, Ontario. And in 1988, that was the first year that the Paralympics was hosted in the same city as the Olympics. Finally, in 1989, the International Paralympic Committee, or IPC, the governing body that oversees the Paralympic Games, was established as a non-profit organization, which basically brings us to the present. So that's a brief overview of the Paralympic Games history. Which brings me to the last thing I want to talk about today, which is some of the different sports in the Winter Paralympics. Now there's 6 main sports that are part of the Pyeongchang 2018 Paralympic Games. They are as follows. There's para-alpine skiing, para-biathlon, para-cross-country skiing, para-ice hockey, para-snowboard, and wheelchair curling. So I'm going to talk about each of them briefly. So the first sport is para-alpine skiing. Now, like a lot of the sports in the Paralympics, it's divided into categories for sitting, standing, and visually impaired athletes. Now, the sitting athletes sit in what kind of looks like a a one-bladed sleigh, which they ski down the hill using, and they have something called outriggers, which are special poles that they use to maintain their balance, which is important because they can be going up to 100 kilometers an hour at times. The visually impaired athletes, on the other hand, have a guide who they communicate with via Bluetooth headset, who basically directs them where to go. The next sport is parabiathlon. Like Olympic biathlon, it's part cross-country skiing and part shooting. Now, the sitting athletes use a special sled to do the skiing portion of the event. And again, the visually impaired athletes have a guide that directs them where to go. When it comes to the shooting, the visually impaired athletes don't actually use a gun with live ammunition. Instead, the gun has laser beams, which they fire at the target, and they use a special device which lets them know whether or not they're aiming at the target, which I thought was pretty cool. Para cross-country skiing, like I said, they sit in what appears to be a two-bladed sled. It's different from the sled that is used in para-alpine skiing, because for para cross-country skiing, you're not going downhill, but you're going, well, cross-country. And then para ice hockey. Para ice hockey is similar to sledge hockey in that the players are sitting in a sled, and they propel themselves around with two para ice hockey sticks, which basically look like miniature hockey sticks, which they also use to hit the puck with. The main difference between para ice hockey and sledge hockey is that in sledge hockey, a sledge only has one blade, but the sled in para ice hockey has two blades. Other than that, the rules for para ice hockey are the same rules established by the International Ice Hockey Federation, so they're the same rules that they follow in Olympic ice hockey. And then there's para snowboard. There's events for athletes with various limb deficiencies. And finally, there's wheelchair curling. Now, as the name suggests, with wheelchair curling, the players are sitting in a wheelchair, and they actually use a special pole to move the rocks down the ice into position. But the main difference between wheelchair curling and traditional curling is that in wheelchair curling, there is no sweeping involved in the sport. Now, I myself have actually participated in wheelchair curling many years ago, and it was something that I really enjoyed doing. But anyway, that's just a brief overview of some of the sports that will be taking place at this year's Paralympic Games. Now, I'm going to include some links in the description that will talk more about the history of the Paralympics and of the different sports in the Paralympics, which I encourage you to check out. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to it to see more videos, and don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you found everything today as interesting, as exciting as I did. I know I had fun researching this, and I hope to see you on Thursday.